you know how you just like traveled all of Europe and saw every art piece there? Philly's going to be cooler than all of that.
If you like food more than art.
If you like food more than art.
Listen, we got a lot of art here too. Welcome to I'd Buy That for $1, a podcast about inexpensive, common, and underappreciated records that are waiting to be rediscovered. I'm your host, Sean Hartman, collector of 80s dance bands that use a single verb as their name.
Ooh, you came to the right episode today.
I did. Can anybody think of any other bands that I might collect?
No.
Chic.
Is that a verb?
Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah, see, it's got to be verbs. I'm very particular.
I can't think of any.
Why don't you tell us? I don't know what a verb is.
Well, there might be more, but so far I have records by Switch, Surface, Climax, Shadow, Zap, Catch, and Change.
Wow.
Impressive.
You must really do this. Wow, I'm impressed.
I don't really think of zap as a verb normally, but I guess
But
you're
it
right.
could be.
Yeah.
I mean, same thing with Surface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Shadow.
I zapped you, Jeremy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're right. Well, I'm co-host Jeremy, and I'm starting a new anti-political action committee. Not like I'm against political action committees, but I just look around me and I think, everything is fine still. We don't need to do anything, right? And
no notes.
Everything's great. And I'm calling this new anti-political action committee Changes Baloney.
Now
It's going to catch on.
See, I want to somehow make PAC, Political Action Committee, into a Tupac thing, and he had the song Changes.
Ooh.
But I wasn't ready for your title, so I'm going to just go ahead with what I had planned. And that is that my name is Peter Cook, your normally relatively chill co-host, but I am hoppin' hostile after spending an hour at Pantera Bread waiting for my order. In fact,
we have a dissatisfied customer on our hands.
I'm so upset with Pantera Bread. I'm so hoppin' hostile that you can just call me Crab for this episode.
Ooh, you should have just walked.
Oh. Well, that's the three normal co-hosts. Is there anybody else in the house?
Hey, I'm Lauren Rams. I don't have a fancy thing to say about who I am and why I'm here, except to say that I am a vinyl hoarder and I am a proud returning person. I'm proud to be returning for my third time on the podcast.
Yeah, it's kind of become a tradition here. I'd buy that for $1 that you come on in the fall time and talk to us about a hype record.
And about Quebecois separatism.
I mean, I'm not an expert on Quebecois separatism, but happy to teach everyone how to pronounce Quebecois and other French words.
Yeah, I walked in with my food late to the recording session, and that was the green room discussion that was happening.
I don't even know why.
Because as an American, I feel it is my duty to grill any Canadians about Quebecois separatism.
Yes, Lauren is our Canadian guest. And what did you bring this time, Lauren?
First, I want to say thank you. Yes, I am a Canadian guest based in Toronto, not Quebec, but maybe I'll be in Montreal sometime soon and I can scope out all the great Montreal disco records in dollar bins in Quebec. But I brought Sharing Your Love, which is the third studio album by Change.
Change.
It's a verb.
Yeah.
I really, really like this record. It was released in 1982. And I don't really remember the first time I heard Change's music, but I've always sort of known them as a heavy hitter in the world of disco. And I found this record for $5 and I picked it up right away. I assumed that because of the price and the year it was released, that it wouldn't be as good as their first two records. I'm curious, did you guys know about Change before I brought this on the pod?
Negative.
Hard no.
Yeah, I've known about Change for a long time. I've got Miracles. I still don't have a good copy of Glow of Love. I've found some like really beat up ones that I've passed on. And then I also really like their 1984 record Change of Heart that Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis produced.
Nice.
Oh, wow, you go deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Play a song.
First, I just want to say this record definitely has more elements of R&B than their previous records. And I've given it a few more listens again for this podcast and realizing that it really does stand up on its own. It's not perfect. I think the cover of Oh, What a Night is a truly awful cover. I can't stand it. It's like unlistenable. But I think that if Change hadn't released, two massively successful records prior to this one, that this record would still be talked about today. But yeah, I played this next track we were going to play. I played this track, Take You to Heaven, at a recent DJ night, and people loved it. It's a really great track to warm up the crowd. It's got a bit of a slower tempo and steady bass that Change is kind of known for in their earlier records. So yeah, we've got Take You to Heaven.
Let's warm up the podcast crowd with that selection.
Let's do it.
Side B, track 2, Take You to Heaven.
Just take my hand, I'll show you heaven. In love forever. Come go with me, the door is open. We'll be together.
Treasures that you never knew existed. They're just a touch away. And I know once we feel the pleasure of sharing each other, we'll never let go.
Just take my hand, I'll show you heaven.
I'll show you heaven.
In love forever.
In love forever.
Come go with me, the door is open.
The door is open.
We'll be together.
Soaring through the universe like magic. Oh, but it will be real. And we could live on any planet, making a habit of the greatest feeling.
Come go with me, the door is open.
Ooh, the door is
We'll
open.
be together.
We'll be together.
So to my ears, that would be a great example of sophisticated funk. Would anybody agree with that?
Sophistafunk?
Sophistafunk.
I assume the sophistication is the musical side, not the lyrical side.
Yeah, generally
Yeah.
the lyrics don't have to be sophisticated for it to be sophistafunk.
Yeah, it's really tight. It's very well produced.
Yeah, tight, well produced, usually a little bit more of a laid back tempo, oftentimes a lot of extra instrumentation, kind of a lush sound going on.
Yeah, it also has that 4 on the floor beat that I think is really prominent and carried by more than one instrument. So it's almost jarring, but definitely belongs on a dance floor despite it not being super high BPM.
Yeah, it's definitely got those post-disco vibes to it for sure.
Yeah.
Sean, do you happen to know the name Johnny Kemp at all?
Seen it around and kind of know it. I don't know a whole lot about him, though.
He was the songwriter behind that.
Ah,
He's a Bahamian singer.
interesting.
Yeah, he had a huge hit in 1988, about 6 years after this, called "Just Got Paid." That's his big claim to fame. But yeah, he co-wrote this along with Davide Romani, who I'm sure we will mention again, an Italian musician who also plays keyboards on this album and was heavily involved in the arranging and conducting of much of it. Effectively like a co-producer, Davide Romani.
And that's a really good segue into just like the point I want to make from the top, which is that Change was a group made up of session musicians. You know, there's so many folks involved in this record, both as producers and performers. Change was founded or created by a businessman, Jacques Fred Petrus, who basically wanted to capitalize on disco's immense popularity. And so I think like every track is just so rich with like different musicians and producers who sort of had a hand in putting this record together, and really every Change record together.
I was pretty glad that I listened to this before reading about them, because the nature of that they're, you know, made by a businessman and, you know, it's a bunch of hired guns, made me not as, I don't know, that's not my vibe. I have weird hang-ups about that they're kind of that like sellout thing that I think is both dumb, but like somehow is so deeply ingrained in me that it's hard to ignore for me.
I feel the same way. I think that like the more research I did into Petrus, the business person who put this band together, and other folks involved, it's like clearly this was music made explicitly for profit. It's not a passion project. It's like, let's make as much money as we can on this like dance music trend. But they hired the right people because it sounds great.
And also that approach, I mean, has always been pretty common in the music industry, but was especially common for disco.
Absolutely.
It was a very producer-driven genre and business person-driven genre.
Before I realized that was the case with this record, there were a couple things that were indications that maybe something like that was going on. We aren't playing either of these songs, but I noticed that the intro, the drum fill intro to both Promise Your Love and the title track, Sharing Your Love, were identical. You cannot tell the difference between those two drum fills.
Yeah.
So just a few things that made it seem a little, dare I say, manufactured. But ultimately, it's pretty good if that's the case.
But now, maybe I'm mistaken, but isn't this the record where some of the musicians started to have more say in the sound and the songwriting than the previous two albums? They were like kind of starting to come out as their own and as a group a little bit here.
Yeah, I think in the first two Change records, and I've got, like, I can chat about this a little bit more in depth later, but the first two Change records where all the songs were exclusively written by this like in-house writing and production team who like put everything together in the studio in Bologna and then like shipped it out to the US to fill it in with the rest of the music, like the vocals, etc. So it was very much like a factory of like creating really great dance hits.
Based on how they're dressed up on the cover, I looks like they've been making that money.
Yeah.
This group has been pulling in some hits and some cash for
let's talk about the
behind
cover. They're really serving some 80s Wall Street realness with the fashions on this cover. And I really want to talk about the cover before we get too much into like who's involved. The cover of this album is so different than the previous two Change albums, which featured geometric patterns for their cover art. It was like really not about the people involved in their records. The first two albums are just like random artful decoration. Whereas this one, it's the first Change album that features some of the musicians on the cover. So if you search Change on Google, this is the first image that you'll find. It's the most, prominent one, I guess.
Yeah. I noticed that it's often used for them.
Yeah, I think it's the Discogs profile picture for Change. But it should be noted that throughout the band's tenure, the members changed a lot. And also a lot of the musicians who contributed to each album weren't technically in the band, so they're not in the album artwork. So there are 7 people on this cover, but it isn't really a reflection of who is in the band and who is making the music. But yeah, the cover is super stylized to me. It looks really like they're participating in Reaganomics or maybe looking for finance jobs because they're all wearing gray drab suits and fancy accessories. They just look well put together. They're ready to go to work for Wall Street.
Yeah, the height of 80s business fashion here.
Yeah, 1982.
I also love how somehow each person on the cover is bringing a different vibe. They can't seem to decide are we smiling, are we not, are we looking cool, are we looking sexy, are we putting on the ridiculous Coke bottle glasses for this or the sunglasses?
Yeah, everyone does look kind of different. It's who was the art director on this one? But the guy in the back, who I'll get to, is he looks so stone-faced, just not interested.
The photographer was Jim Houghton, and the art direction was Bob Defrin. I know nothing more about them than that. I just happen to be holding the jacket.
Well, they did a great job because somehow, despite all of the weird facial expressions, or not weird, the different facial expressions, somehow it all comes together.
Yeah, it's still iconic.
Yes.
We should not overlook stylist Veronica Riley because I bet she had something to do with
the look.
Yeah.
As a side note, I want to say there's so many names on the back of this record, and I want to go through a few of them right now.
I thought you were going to say all of them.
I want to go through all of them. We'll be here for hours. Oh my God.
I tried to count all the players on the Discogs page, and I think it's 68, somewhere around there.
It's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but it worked out. But I want to go over just 7 of them, the 7 folks who were on the cover of this record, and point out that Change was a manufactured band, as we've discussed, and all of the folks on the cover, well, obviously the band itself is sort of amorphous with all sorts of session musicians in the background. All the folks on the cover have their own success outside of Change. It was almost like this was a sort of a stepping stone for them, for most of them. So on the left, we've got Jeff Bova, who's the keyboardist. He's wearing those really funky sunglasses that are so 80s. He actually went on to win a Grammy for his production work with Celine Dion. Totally random.
Wow.
He's also worked with Westlife and Katy Perry. I did find him on LinkedIn. He's got a website called Bovaland or something. Yeah.
Wow. That might be the first time that we've used LinkedIn as a source.
He's a serious businessman, as indicated by this cover art.
Yeah.
He loves LinkedIn. Anyway, next to Jeff is Vincent Henry. He's right to his right. He's the saxophone player and guitarist. Also a session musician who released his own smooth jazz album in 1990. I did listen to some of it for this episode. Sadly, it's not great, but he had some success actually releasing his own album, which is pretty cool. Then next to Vincent, we've got Deborah Cooper right in the center, giving you these really sultry eyes. She's the lead vocalist. And she had a lot of success outside of Change. She actually went on to perform with CNC Music Factory.
Oh.
Yeah. And then she also was a background singer for Mariah Carey and Jessica Simpson, randomly. And a bunch of other pop divas.
Wow.
I like
Yeah.
one of those two artists.
I am
Right.
also a huge Jessica Simpson fan. Have you read her book? It's really good. And also, I love Mariah Carey. I can't lie.
Okay.
So next to Deborah, we've got this like stone-faced guy in the background, clearly the tallest of the bunch. His name is Rick Galway. He's the percussionist. I didn't find out a lot about him except that he's a session musician as well who contributed to a bunch of different records. This was the only Change record he was on, though. And he's got his arm around Timmy Allen, the bassist, the very right, not to be confused with Tim Allen.
Oh yeah,
Local hero.
yeah. Local Kalamazoo hero, Tim Allen. It was here that he got busted at the airport for dealing coke, right, Jeremy?
Yeah, he got busted with it was like 11 pounds of coke or something. It was like an insane amount because he apparently had
Wow.
climbed the chain.
Yeah,
That's
His,
wild.
that's his legacy in Kalamazoo. Home Improvements, Tim Allen.
And he
Oh my
went to our
goodness.
university here.
Yeah, he went to Western.
Didn't he also like rat out his buddies to get a reduced sentence or something cool like
Yes.
that? Hell yeah.
And went on to
Wow.
become a conservative icon. Who'd have thought?
I mean, it's some great local trivia and like, you know, talking about drugs, like definitely in line with the 80s aesthetic. So, you know,
True.
he's not related to this album, but he's here in spirit. Different Tim Allen. Timmy Allen is the bassist who went on to become a producer with Jive Records.
Oh wow.
And he worked with R. Kelly and the Backstreet Boys and Britney Spears. Like hugely successful.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It looks like around this time he was also in the BB&Q band, which is one of my
Yeah.
favorite 80s funk groups.
Okay, so I did some research into that. Side note, BB&Q. Wait, BBQ? Is that what you say?
BB&Q, it's the
BB&Q.
Brooklyn, Bronx, and Queens band.
So that band was actually formed by Petrus, I think, according to Wikipedia.
Oh, interesting.
Don't quote me on that. I should really do more research, but he had his hand in a lot of different bands.
The
Well,
same
it would make
guy.
sense because it looked like there might be a couple people that
Yes.
crossed over into the BB&Q band from this record.
And then after that, we've got James Robinson in the sunglasses in the center, looking pretty cool, really dapper. He's the lead vocalist. He left Change after this album to pursue a solo career, which unfortunately wasn't super successful. He just released one album, Guilty, in 1987. But I want to point out that he has an incredible vocal range, and I highly recommend that listeners check out the song Can We Do It Again from that album. It's really cheesy, but it's also really catchy, and I love it. And his voice is just so perfect.
He sometimes seems to go by the nickname Crab, which is where I got my title from.
Yeah, what's that about? I wonder where that came from.
I didn't look into it enough, considering that I decided to go with it. That's my-
Well, I guess we better find him on LinkedIn and see what the whole crab thing
Yeah.
is about then.
I'm sure he's on there along with everyone else on this record.
Side note, it looks like he also did some vocals with Norman Connors and Lonnie Liston Smith.
Yeah, people on this record are just kind of all over the place. You could really go down a rabbit hole with all of the different folks listed. And I did with the last person here, Mike Campbell, who's in the front, sitting down, looking kind of out of it. He's the guitarist, and he was also a prolific session musician. He passed away in 2014, but one of the albums he was part of was D'Angelo's Voodoo.
Wow.
He played on the first track. Again, according to Wikipedia and Discogs, but like that's incredible.
Yeah.
What a run.
Another guy who was in the BB&Q band, it looks
Yeah.
like.
There you go. So, although these are the people on the cover, there's also a lot of folks in the background, as we sort of alluded to. There's like tons of folks on the back of the record just listed, including Kashif, who was a successful solo musician and also known for his production work with Evelyn Champagne King.
Yeah.
Leroy Burgess, who's a disco soul singer, keyboard player, songwriter, and producer. He actually wrote one of the tracks that we'll play later. And singer Fonzie Thornton, who worked with Chic, Roxy Music, and Aretha Franklin.
Yeah.
Just what a wild run.
Yeah, it's been way too long since we mentioned Kashif on I'd Buy That for $1. There was a time where he was coming up like every other episode, but
Yeah, the legend.
thanks for bringing him back, Lauren.
Anytime.
I wonder which tracks he's on, because actually one of the first times I played this record, I think like the first 2 tracks especially, I was like, man, this kind of sounds like Kashif. And then I look it up, and sure enough, he's on here somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like recommend that folks check out the album on Discogs just to sift through all the folks who contributed to the album, because at some point while researching for the podcast, I had to stop myself because I was falling down so many rabbit holes of like different people involved. And it's just, you could really just research this for days and days.
Well, how about we listen to another song and let people go deeper on their own time?
Sounds good.
Yeah, we were talking about playing the lead single from this album, The Very Best in You, as our next selection, which is side A, track 1.
Something very special, so sweet, so refined, and you're such a lovely lady, yeah. And I'm so glad that your heart is really mine. I get excited about this love that we found, and I'm glad we got together. It's so nice having you around, man. This is for the very best of you, because there's no one better. This is for the very best of you. Oh, girl. Everything I hope for, yeah. In a girl I can find, and you're so understanding. You're so sweet and you're so kind. I really mean it. Oh, baby. From my heart, I must say, I never, never, ever gonna leave it. It's right here where I'll always stay. You're my lover and you turn me on. I thought I'd never fall so strong. Please say to me, this love will never end.
Yeah, I think that track is a really good example of Change's shift to more of an R&B sound, especially in the bridge. It's like so smooth on this track.
Yeah, and that's definitely the song that has the Kashif vibes for me.
Yeah.
Even the vocals by James Robinson kind of sound like what Kashif would have been doing.
Yeah. That was written by Herb Smith, one of the guitarists on this album, who had worked on a lot of Philadelphia International Records releases, as well as the other co-writer on it was Maru Malavasi, who was the co-producer on this album and Petruce's business partner.
So, yeah, we've sort of talked a lot about this record, and I want to talk about Change more generally, because I think it really helps to set the stage for like the context of this record and what it was created to do, to like be profitable.
Yeah.
So Change was formed in Italy in 1980 as a studio band by this businessman we've sort of referred to, Jacques Fred Petruce. So Petrus actually moved to Milan from Guadalupe in the early 70s, where he met Mauro Malavasi and formed Goody Music Productions, which also set up a recording studio in Bologna. So they were pretty successful sort of farming out this Italo disco sound. Their first project was called Macho, which released an... That's right. They actually released an 18-minute long disco version of the Spencer Davis Group's I'm a Man, which is on Spotify. You can listen to it and its various remixes. Encourage listeners to do that. It's a really good example of Italo or like Euro disco because it's the first disco record made entirely by Italian musicians that became like a worldwide hit. So obviously they were doing pretty well with their record label. And they released a lot of other records as well, mainly written and performed by session musicians that they scouted while out in the nightclub scene, meeting different folks. But then they formed Little Macho Music and opened up their own office in New York City. So they formed Changed in 1980, and it was highly influenced by Chic's success. You know, obviously Chic is this like huge disco band, international sensation, touring all over, selling platinum records. And Petrus hired Italian musicians to write and arrange the tracks in his studio in Bologna before they were shipped to the US, where the vocals were added. I think I mentioned that earlier. It's sort of this factory of production of creating these really stellar hits. And of course, Petrus himself was not a musician, was not a producer. He just had the capital and the business acumen to like figure all of this stuff out. So Change debuted with the album The Glow of Love. It was a huge success. It spent 9 weeks at the top of the US dance charts and featured a young and not yet very well known Luther Vandross on the title track. This helped launch his career, and most know the song today as the sample from Janet Jackson's All For You. It was also sampled by Aretha Franklin in the song Here We Go Again in 1998. But the song A Lover's Holiday from this record was actually the record's first single, and Zachary Sanders of Schoolhouse Rock was the vocalist. He actually ad-libbed a lot of that track as well. So you can kind of get this sense that like throughout Change's discography, there's just all sorts of folks involved who aren't like necessarily part of the band. Their second record, Miracles, was released in 1981. James Robinson, who's with the guy with the sunglasses on the cover of this record, he replaced Vandross on the record, who was still technically in the band, but could only contribute background vocals because at this point he was becoming much more successful and he had a lot of contract issues. And by the time Change released Sharing Your Love, Vandross wasn't in the band anymore, and Robinson had sort of fully replaced him as the lead singer.
Yeah, no Luther Vandross on this album that we're listening to today.
No, sadly. Many other great singers, though.
That was the part that I think when I read, like, Luther Vandross decided not to be on the record because of contract disputes or whatever. I was like, what is this? Like, nobody wants to do this. It's just for money.
Yeah.
But
yeah, definitely. But it's really good, though. Like, it does have that feeling of, like, we are creating music as just a commercial product. Like, we don't care about this being a passion project, but it is really incredible music. Miracles is an amazing record.
They got a bunch of assassins.
They really did. They really did. They all killed it.
Yeah, I can't deny the groove.
No, you can't deny the groove. The hooks, the groove, the beat. It's amazing. Paradise and Hold Tight are two incredible songs on Miracles. And I think they're like a perfect bridge between 70s disco and 80s R&B. So two standout tracks.
Miracles is the album that precedes the one we're listening to today.
That's right. So it was Glow of Love, Miracles, and Sharing Your Love, which Sharing Your Love sort of moved them further to that R&B sound. It's like kind of a departure from their more like disco vibes. And it's also a departure from their writing process. So when Macho Music moved to New York, they obviously made a lot more connections with folks in that city. And the album features songs by other artists that were, based in the States instead of their previous records, which were all made up or written by their like in-house writing team in Italy. It's also a shift to where it was recorded. So their two other albums were were partially or totally recorded in the studio in Bologna, whereas Sharing Your Love was recorded entirely at Media Sound Studios in New York, which is a pretty big studio. Like a bunch of amazing records were recorded there.
Yeah, a lot of the session players on this I recognize from other New York adjacent stuff we featured.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do we want to play another clip from this record at this point?
Yes, absolutely.
What did you have in mind?
So I've got You're My Number One in mind, which is written by Leroy Burgess, who is a pretty heavy hand in this record, despite not technically being in the band, and Sonny Davenport, who is Leroy Burgess's cousin, and James Calloway, who's a bassist and songwriter who worked regularly with Burgess. So it's kind of a all in the family type of track, and I love it. So let's play it.
Yeah. So You're My Number One, side B, track 4. The last track that we featured, The Very Best in You, is, as far as I can tell, the only song from this that really had much impact on the R&B charts or the Billboard Hot 100. But man, I really think that could have been a hit. That's a hot number there.
Absolutely. It's a great track. It's like smooth yet dancey. Like it's so early 80s. I love it.
Feels like a courting song to me.
Courting?
I'd do some courting to a song like that.
100%.
What happened to co-host
I
Jeremy?
don't know. The twang overtook me.
This seems like the record that would do that, not Dottie West or Ray Price.
Yeah.
That was funny.
Good times.
So that's Chic. Good Times is Chic.
Oh, right. I always get them confused because they sound so similar.
I could definitely see why how this group was influenced by Chic. But as you said, this really has gone away from that disco into kind of it's starting to sound like R&B as it developed throughout the 80s, eventually leading to like New Jack Swing type stuff.
Oh, totally. It definitely has that vibe. And evidently some of the New Jack Swing producers
Yeah.
who went on to Time Records.
So, what happens in the story after this record, or where do we want to what do we want to focus on in the story of change?
Yeah, so they did release a few more records after this one, and I just wanted to point out their last record, Turn on Your Radio, has a really great track called Mutual Attraction. Highly recommend folks listen to that one. But Petrus continued to be like credited as the producer of these albums and other albums that he was releasing. But he's, of course, not a musician or a producer. And I kind of want to talk about his reputation and give some insight into what it must have been like to be a session musician on one of these albums. So sadly, Petrus was killed in 1987 at the age of 39. He was accused of tax evasion in 1986. So he fled the country. He went home to Guadalupe and was murdered a year later. It's pretty wild. No one actually knows who the killer is, but he was partying at a club that he owned. So he's a high roller. He got into a fight with someone, and that man followed him home and shot him.
Jeez.
And Petrus had a reputation for being ruthless. He, not to say that he deserved to be killed, but he didn't produce or write any of the albums he helped release, even though he falsely took credit for it. And he also set up like musical guidelines that writers had to strictly follow. And he had the final say on like everything he funded. And I found this quote from Bobby Douglas, who was a vocalist on Sharing Your Love. When asked about Petrus's death, he actually said, "I know that it was something waiting to happen because you can't be that evil to that many people and not have your karma affected."
Oof.
Pretty spicy, pretty damning.
Heavy quote there.
But you just imagine like how difficult and stressful it would have been to be a singer, anyone related or involved in these records. It must have been so difficult to produce and record the album. And it does make you think about how it was made purely for profit. So the shift away from disco to R&B on this record was just Petrus like following the money and making something that would generate more sales. It's not a passion project, but it does sound really good. And it does make you think differently about the last song I want to play. I also wanted to point out that, I'm getting into some of this information just from, researching online, but there's a lot of nuance to it. And I encourage listeners to look into it as well and really get a fuller picture of change and Petrus and the history of Italo disco, because there's really so much to explore.
Yeah, there's a lot here. I mean, as you said, just alone, there's so many people credited in the production process of this. The aforementioned Davide Romani and Mauro Malavasi. I have a feeling that their names are right next to Jacques-Fred Petrus, but I have a feeling they had a lot more to do with the musical aspect of it than he did. But yeah, it's fascinating. And the weird thing about this band is I could find very little, if any, footage of them on YouTube, like live stuff. Like as far as like not even like lip syncing type stuff of them performing stuff from this album, or it's wild. But there's a lot. There is information out there. Like I had stumbled on an interview with Davide Romani, and there's stuff out there. There's a following to this, and there's a lot of people involved. So the information could get cobbled together into a more complete picture, and hopefully we've at least started here today.
Well, you wonder, like, maybe Change didn't tour that much. There's not that much footage of them performing live because they released these 3 albums in 3 years. Like, they were working at a pretty steady clip to get this stuff done. And they were also probably working on a lot of other albums as well, maybe touring with other bands.
Sean, this seems like your bag. I'm excited to see what you found or what you have as recommended similar albums.
Well, I was just thinking that with all the Italo disco references, I probably should have put some other Italian-based artists on the recommended list, which I did not. But the ones I did put on here, first up, Atlantic Star, Yours Forever from 1983. One of my favorite early 80s records, and one that is currently on our long list of possible future podcast albums. Second one, 1982 record, Aura, A Little Love. Do you guys remember talking about the band Aura in one of our recent episodes?
I remember that name, but I'm blanking on what they were mentioned in.
That is an offshoot of the band Slave, fronted by the lead singer Steve Washington. But more of that sophisticated R&B funk sound, some similarities going on. And then one last 1982 record produced by Kashif, Evelyn King, Get Loose, previously featured on an episode of this show.
Nice.
Lauren, you've been hyped on some Evelyn Champagne King as of late, haven't you?
Yeah, I think she's incredible. I found this record, Face to Face, by Evelyn King. Interestingly, it was produced by Leon Silvers III.
Oh.
Familiar face. Yeah.
Who we talked about last time you were on.
Yeah, that's right.
'Cause he was involved in Dynasty.
That's exactly right. But there's this great track. It's on the second side, Given You My Love. What You Gonna Do With It? It's a really incredible dance number, and I played it out and I loved it.
Yeah, I'm sorry that it's just too soon. We recently decided that we have to wait until episode 983 to feature any artists that we've previously featured.
Many years from now, yeah.
Yeah, many years from now. That was going to be another. You had thrown that out as an option, but here we are with Change. Well, Lauren, what did you want to play to go out on here?
Yeah, I want to play a track called Hard Times. It's Gonna Be All Right. This is the second track on the album, and it was written by that production team of Mauro Malavasi, Davide Romani, and allegedly Petrus, but he was not a songwriter, along with Fonzie Thornton. I was thinking about this track because I think thematically it's a perfect track for today's economic climate. It's an anthem about just how difficult things are and, trying to dance through it, I guess. But it did make me think about how difficult it would have been in the studio recording these tracks with, Petrus cracking the whip. So I imagine to be a fly on the wall of that, this session it must have been really difficult. And then just to sing this song, It's Gonna Be All Right, must have been a bit jarring. But I think it's also a great track because it reminds me of Leroy Burgess. He has a song that he performed with the Universal Robot Band called Barely Breaking Even, which is a really amazing dance number about the pressures of late stage capitalism. It's a working class anthem about just wanting to enjoy life with dignity despite the grind. I played it out recently and it's a banger. The best version of Barely Breaking Even is on YouTube, not Spotify. So I would encourage folks to find it there. But I think it's interesting because it's another tie-on to Burgess, who, contributed to the record both as a writer and a singer. And this song is very much in line with that theme. So let's play it.
Fantastic.
I hope that wasn't too long. Sorry, I just kept going.
No, things to think about. That gives us things to think about here as we get out of here on this episode of I'd Buy That for $1. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us yet again.
It was a pleasure, as always.
Bringing a little bit of that change our way. Well, my name is Peter Cook.
I'm co-host Jeremy.
I'm co-host Sean.
And I'm Lauren.
say. Information, money is talking, everybody's talking about recession. Just hold on, it's gonna be alright. It's gonna be alright. Everyone's wondering how they're gonna make it. Don't worry, we can do it. Think about all the rough times that we've been through. We're a winner. Be strong, try to smile again.